Na sadva sadyadapi paramam vedavatanna veda yat satyam tanna khalu kushalai chhidyate tarkabanaihi dvaita dvaita tyakilamati yat padam sevyate tate vande cheto vilaya nilayam sharada pada padmam Sankhyaṁ yogam pashupati matam vaishnavam va yathecham charvakam va bhavatu hridaya ladakam sajjananam yat satyam tat pramiti pathagam swaprakasham varenyam dadyat chaukyam jagati sakalam darshanam sharadaya.
Good morning or good evening to everybody. We'd like to welcome you to the 6th talk in the Vimarsha Academia series. And we're really delighted to get back to school in August. Our August semester is just starting underway for most of us. We have a really special talk plan, and it's on Pratyabhijñā Nondual Śaiva philosophy, Peirce and Semiotics, by Dr. David Peter Lawrence. And so anybody who wants to ask questions, please feel free to write your questions in the chat, and we'll call on you at the end of the talk. I leave it to Professor Timosina now to formally introduce Professor Lawrence. Thank you.
Professor David Peter Lawrence received his PhD from the University of Chicago, and his research interests include Hindu and Buddhist philosophy and religion, non-dual Kashmiri Shaivism and Tantra, Sanskrit, intercultural philosophy of religions, philosophy of intercultural dialogue and cultural theories, history of religions, psychology of religions, and mysticism. He has previously taught at universities in Hong Kong and Canada, and is now professor in the Department of Philosophy at the University of North Dakota. His publications include many articles and the books Rediscovering God with Transcendental Argument, a contemporary interpretation of monistic Kashmiri Shaiva philosophy from SUNY Press, and The Teachings of the Odd-Eyed, on a study and translation of the Virupaksha Panchashika with the commentary of Vidya Chakravartin. Presently, he is completing Abhinavagupta's commentary on the recognition of the Lord, a translation of the Ishvara Pratyabhijñā Vimarshini and Utpala's Ishvara Pratyabhijñā Karika with introduction and notes. Among his research stays in India since the 1980s. Professor Lawrence spent academic year 11 and 12 there as recipient of a Fulbright Nehru Senior Research Fellowship. In spring 2014, Professor Lawrence was appointed visiting professor of philosophy and religious studies at the University of Nairobi, but could not go because of health issues. But more than these written intros, my personal connection with Professor David Lawrence goes to 2003 in Arizona Flagstaff Tantra Studies Conference. It did not take even 5 minutes for me to recognize him as my big brother and for him as his own little bro. And in these 20 years plus interactions, he has taught me many things. And he has inspired me to do many things, including climbing the Everest, not really all the way to the top. And he is a man of insight and heart beyond what you can see in his writings. And we have shared many jokes that I do not have the luxury to share with anybody but himself. I thank you, David, for your constant inspiration and love and guiding us to bring these ideas to the globe. Your inspiration is deeply appreciated. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much, Professor Timosina. I'm grateful for your introduction and for the invitation from you and the Vimarsha Foundation to talk to you all. I wanted to mention a few things. First of all, in the last several years, I have had a lot of health problems, and they're continuing. And a couple of the obvious results of those health problems are the spasms I have in my face, and I have some speech deficit. I think most people can understand me. My students usually understand me, and I hope that you can. But I don't mind being interrupted for repetition of something or to clarify any intellectual issue during the talk. So I proceed onward. I've also, I haven't changed the subject, but I slightly changed the topic because there was, even in the original paper, a brief background discussion of some Neoplatonism beside Peirce. I just changed the title. It doesn't matter for myself, at least. It's called Engagements of Pratyabhijñā Nondual Śaiva Philosophy with Neoplatonism and Peircean Thought. So this is, well, I'll go onward and we'll see how. First, I'll give to you a brief introduction to some of the salient points I understand in the Pratyabhijñā philosophy. In non-dual Shaivism, I'll read some of this and explain some. In non-dual Shaivism, as in many Hindu conceptions of male deities, the Lord is the Shaktiman, the possessor of Shakti, encompassing her within his androgynous nature as his integral consort and potency. According to the predominant non-dual Shaiva, panentheistic cosmogony and metaphysics, Shiva, out of a kind of play, divides himself from Shakti, and then in sexual union emanates, embodies himself within, and controls the universe through her. The basic pattern of practice is the recapitulation of the cosmogony. Thus, in non-dual Shaivism, there is the approach to Shiva. The approach to Shiva is through his emanatory Shakti. The same mythical, that's why it's also called Shakti Shaivism. The same mythical ritual process is articulated in practical, symbolic, philosophical, and theological terms. The Pratyabhijñā system of Utpaladeva and Abhinavagupta replicates this modus operandi in Shastric philosophical discourse as the disclosure that one has Shiva's Shakti, This disclosure is called Shakti-Avishkarana. The publicly intelligible inference is I am Shiva because I have Shakti. A little bit like He-Man. He always says at the beginning of the cartoon, I have the power. Anyway, it's a totally different idea. The Pratyabhijñā epistemology primarily explains Shakti as the idealistically constitutive self-recognition, and explains Shakti as the idealistically constitutive self-recognition. That is Pratyabhijñā, or there are other terms such as Aham Pratyabhijñā, and there are also additional terms. There are Vimarsha and its cognates, which are all about certain kinds of judgment or apprehensions there. I usually use apprehension now. That you can see, if you read the text, has a recognitive structure. It's synthesizing things. So now I put in parentheses, recognitive apprehension. Besides this recognitive synthesis, the Vimarsha terms, Vimarsha and cognates, there is analogous a kind of synthesis, recognitive synthesis described with Anusandana and its cognates. Shakti and its equivalents are also identified with the principle of supreme speech, Pratyabhijñā, derived from the linguistic philosopher Bhartrihari, and they derive it, they claim it's based on Bhartrihari, but that's a debate I can't enter into. And this speech is articulated in language and what is called subtle language, which I believe, and I'll explain more later, we can talk about as it's not conventional language, so I think it makes sense to describe subtle language as semiosis, as using signs to interpret the world. Even our thinking, it's sort of unconscious, but if you look carefully at your thinking, our thinking is not only in words. We're thinking in terms of different kinds of non-language signs all the time. If you're walking too close to the left and you might run into something and we don't have a common language, I might say, make some gesture like that. If something's happening, if you're driving a car through an intersection and you're about to get hit by somebody running the stop sign or light on the right, then you'll have to judge whether you have time to speed up or to stop or you go backwards. You have to figure out how to avoid getting hit. You're thinking, but you're not thinking in terms of words. You're thinking in what Peirce called iconic and indexical signs of things. Anyway, we'll talk more about that. Utpaladeva and Abhinavagupta further conceive recognition and so on in its cognates ontologically as a universal first-person agency. And they have Sanskrit grammatical terms for that, which I won't go into. This agency constitutes reality as a divine action or kriya. Previously, I have ethically characterized the overall argumentation of the Pratyabhijñā system as a transcendental inference in the philosophical theological sense, which is actually pre-Kantian in the West, of identifying God or some other reality as necessary to account for ordinary experience. So first, a few words about Neoplatonism, which will be a background to some of what I'll discuss in Peirce. over recent years, I've comparatively and dialogically engaged the Pratyabhijñā with both Platonism and Neoplatonism, and Charles Peirce, and later Peircean theories. To begin with the former, of course, theories such as the ideas, participation, and the hypotheses and so on are not found in the Tantric tradition. However, Neoplatonism has some parallel in its notion that the perfect actuality of what they call the One emanates through lower levels of reality, in which, even though in itself is perfect, from the perspective of ordinary life, in its reflections, it accrues potentiality. What's reflected has everything is already done in the One. But in Aristotelian terms, like if a ball rolls down a hill, it's because there's something that needs to be completed, which is this potential movement of rolling. So all of this ultimately goes to the completeness of God. So similarly in Shaivism, the world is fragmented and incomplete as a reflection of God, Shiva. I would also like to suggest, besides this parallel about emanation, I would also, to what's imperfect, I would also like to suggest that the Pratyabhijñā epistemological and ontological interpretations of Shakti are analogous to what the West, since Neoplatonism, has described as henological. That's a term for Plotinus. It's like henotheism. It's looking for or discovering the One. Henology is the search for the One through its emanating reflections in the diverse, incomplete world, through the unification of diversity, starting in Platonism with the ideas or forms and going up through the hypotheses and Neoplatonism. In the Pratyabhijñā, likewise, there is the contemplation of unifications of diversity in various domains, as deriving from the non-dual Parameshvara. The interpretation of Shakti mentioned above in terms of Pratyabhijñā, Vimarsha, Paramarsha, Anusandhana, and cognates, as well as Bach, Sambandha, and the Kartri as the Vyapara Ashraya. That's a term from Patanjali for the Kartri. All these are identifying different forms of unification. In the Pratyabhijñā, henology is often articulated within an idealistic logic that SAS percipi, that is to be perceived, coupled with the assertion of the necessity of epistemic and metaphysical synthesis. Worldly unities rest in the oneness of an originary subjectivity. Now, in disclosing Shakti through such unity, the Pratyabhijñā is saying that Parameshvara has some sort of potency, capacity, or potential. Of course, Shakti has many significances in gender and mythology and theology. But philosophically, one thing they're saying is that Parameshvara has some sort of potency, capacity, or potentiality to emanate. Plotinus conceives the One as pure, I've already discussed this, a pure actuality. And because of its perfection, like Poinata in Sanskrit, Plotinus is one fragments and eminence. I've already talked about that. And the same happens with the khandana, the fragmentation of Shiva, becoming everything incomplete and potential in ordinary life. Turning to Peircean thought, which is much more complicated, unfortunately, and I'm going to have to explain more. Peirce is actually a very difficult philosopher to really read. To really try to understand some of his more subtle aspects. I would say he's much more difficult than someone like Kant. Because Peirce invents all these words and he changes the meanings of things. And he's always sort of thinking in a kind of oblique way. I can't explain. I agree with a lot of it. Anyway, turning to Peircean thought, this quest for a theistic dynamic unity is found in Peirce, like I just implied. Peirce was deeply influenced by Friedrich Schelling's objective idealism and nature philosophy, besides talking about science and logic and semiotics and so on. And thus, through Schelling, he was, it seems, indirectly influenced by Neoplatonism. He also talks about the monstrous mysticism of the East. And what is that? I don't know if it's Asian thought or if it might have to do with Kabbalah, Jewish thought, which Jewish thought was considered Oriental at one time. Anyway, though Peirce is not as thoroughly non-dualistic as the Neoplatonists or the Shaivas, we will see that he, like them, is like the Shaivas, is pragmatic, fallibilistic, panentheistic, and in my interpretation, pan-semiotic. All experience is semiotic. Peirce positions his broader philosophy within, this is backtracking, stepping back a second. He positions his broader philosophy within a criteriology of pragmatism, or what he later called pragmaticism. Peirce even formulates a practical sort of inference called abduction, which is a sort of supposition or hypothesis believed to be different from induction or deduction. I remain unready to induce, deduce, or abduce that abduction is an entirely separate type of argument from induction and deduction. And I'm not much interested in that question of whether there is separate. In any event, there is such a practical judgment or argument as Peirce has called abduction. So it illuminates something, just that description. Whether it's separate or not, I haven't entirely decided, but I tend to think it's not. Anyway, my interpretation of Pratyabhijñā argument as abduction was developed in discussions between Arindam Chakrabarti, myself, and Sean McCracken of the California Institute of Integral Studies, for whose doctoral dissertation on Sambandha and Peirce, both Chakrabarti and I were readers. But by some amazing coincidence, I later worked with another PhD student, Jesse Berger of the University of Chicago, on the same Pratyabhijñā transcendental arguments about Sambandha, and again comparing them with Peirce. They had even met each other, and they were working on their dissertations at the same time. Berger had developed parallel, and this is what's really peculiar. Dan Arnold at the University of Chicago has interpreted some Madhyamika arguments, this may be surprising, as transcendental arguments, not all the deconstructed types of arguments about refuting this and that, but the arguments for showing the provisional reality of ordinary life for ordinary, affairs. Those are sorts of transcendental arguments. And Dan Arnold actually had been working on Madhyamika transcendental arguments, and then he took on this Jesse Berger as a PhD student, and somehow in their dialogue, they were doing the same thing that was being done, in my own work and in work with Arindam Chakrabarti and with Sean McCracken. And then, as I became a member of Jesse Berger's committee, we discussed all of the arguments together. So I don't know where they all come from, but anyway, they will understand the classification of the Pratyabhijñā arguments as abduction in their own ways. And I'm only going to explain, even though I'm influenced by the others, I'm going to explain things primarily in my own way. In my understanding, this agrees with several things in the Pratyabhijñā. First of all, in one of the introductory verses, like 1 or 2, it depends how it's numbered, and the Karikas, Upanema says, and he says that he wants to bestow on humanity practical benefit of identity with the deity, which is explained as samasta sampat samavati hetum, which is the cause of attaining all prosperity. But whether it's from Upanema, I haven't examined that. But he interprets it as a top Purusha, which I can't explain further. But that would be explaining the Lord as the basis of everything. And it's the method of giving this benefit. So there is a practical purpose to the whole argument on which it should be evaluated. That's one reason. This also accords with the significance of Shakti to affect practical results in explaining basic epistemological and metaphysical or ontological issues. It also agrees with something I looked at in the argument on plurality and contingency, with Amitav Gupta's broader approach to the arbitration of diverse knowledge claims or recognitions or whatever you call them on the basis of coherence nirvana in pursuing arthakriya, practical utility. So there are a number of indications that support this classification as abduction, although that's a Western term. I think it's illuminating. I also believe, and somebody else I like, is John Hick, the intercultural philosopher of religion. He also shifted towards understanding arguments about the existence of God less as definitive proofs than something that shows the coherence of intellectual options. And I think that this classification as abduction amidst a little bit more wiggle room that Hick is allowing for, and how certain we are about our conclusions until they're further evaluated. So it's more fallibilistic. Anyway, turning again to Peirce directly, despite his many concerns with scientific and technical subjects, Peirce did develop in his papers a rudimentary philosophy of religion, influenced by Shelley. This has been examined most fully by Michael Raposa in Peirce's philosophy of religion. As I have said, Peirce was not what we call non-dualistic, but like the Pratyabhijñā, but his understanding of the relation of God to humans included a more dualistic moment with some unification or deep intimacy. In any event, just to start to introduce this topic, Peirce sometimes comes rather close sounding to the Pratyabhijñā vision. For example, he says, and what is religion? In each individual, it is a sort of sentiment or obscure perception and deep recognition of something in the circumambient all, which, if he strives to express it, will clothe itself in forms more or less extravagant or less accidental. I don't understand that. But ever acknowledging the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, as well as a relation to that absolute of the individual self as a relative being. Like Bhartrihari and the Shaivas, Peirce also variously described the world as a sign, poem, argument, painting, and so on of God. Michael Raposa and Soren Breer have also characterized Peirce's understanding of God as pantheistic. For Peirce, God's two aspects are both a unity and an indeterminate potency that becomes worldly chance, sometimes Peirce describes this unity and potency respectively as Syntactical and Pantheism. Peirce very interestingly interprets creation ex nihilo. We all know the Christian idea. I don't think I need to explain it. Peirce very interestingly interprets creation ex nihilo, not primarily in terms of God's lack of a pre-existing inner or external material cause, but in his ordering creation and time from what in Genesis is called tohu. I don't know how to pronounce the Hebrew. It's called something like tohu bohu, which is a state of indeterminate chaos or unlimited potentiality. Peirce's interpretation may be closer to the Hebrew Bible, actually. I was talking to a friend of mine, a Christian theologian, but I don't know. Someone named Leon Nemosinsky explained this Peirce's idea of this primordial tohu mohu in a manner reminiscent of the way the Shaivas conceive Shakti as part of Parameshwara. He says, I begin my project by considering infinite being, first as an honorific sheer availability of being, potential or possible being, that is unlimited and supreme power, that is the unlimited and supreme power behind the divine's creative becoming. I entitle this creative becoming the divine life, as it represents the life of possibilities, continuous phasing into actuality, continuously phasing into actuality that makes for the evolutionary growth and development of the divine's creative cosmos. I then proceed, this is Nemosinsky interpreting Peirce. I then proceed to consider infinite being in terms of how hypothesis formation or Peircean abduction may reveal the infinite to be an encompassing reality of nature that situates and locates, but also sustains what is finite. Specifically in this context, human inquiries by other life in a perspectival universe. Following Peirce on Tohu, American philosopher and theologian Robert Cummings Neville conceives creation ex nihilo as the generation of the determinate from a potent indeterminate source. He contends that there is this new sense, which is supposedly or possibly something closer to the original, I don't know, maybe, or at least a new sense people are arguing for. He contends that there is this kind of creation ex nihilo, whether cosmogony, this is no, whether there is this ex nihilo, whether creation is viewed as coming from divine command alone, like in traditional Christianity, self-emanation, or pre-existent external matter. Nevertheless, accommodates within his abstract conception Abrahamic, Judeo-Christian, Muslim, Islamic, Taoist, Confucian, Hindu, and Buddhist notions of origination are all creation ex nihilo. Although I have reservations about Neville's reformulations of a common Western understanding of the doctrine of creation ex nihilo, I do like his understanding of creation that accommodates emanation. Neville also describes his position as a form of pantheism that views the cosmos as constituted within the immanence of God's creative eternal unity. This unity provides what Plotinus would call the hedological basis of all sorts of relations through time. Neville says the ontologically creative act is the context of mutual relevance, and only by virtue of the eternal unity of this act can there be temporal relations among the creatures with changing moments of present existence. Just as God's unity from Peirce and Neville is reflected in worldly relations or continuities, Peirce's Pantheism is reflected in chance or the indeterminacy of ordinary life. Something like, even though it may seem surprising at first, I think something like indeterminacy is found in the Sanskrit grammatical notion of svatantriya. It means the kartrika is independent of the operations of the other karka because it's controlling them. The fire has a role, the water has a role, the pot has a role, and so on. Everything we can think of in terms of karkas, except the kartri is svatantra. It's not under the control. But the other karkas, besides, this is from Patanjali, the other karkas are paratantra. They're controlled by something else, which is the kartra. Something in that respect, there is a sort of indeterminacy. This is found in the grammatical notion of svatantriya as distinguishing worldly agency in relation to other karkas. Peirce's Tohu Mohu and Pantheism have also been linked to quantum indeterminacy. Indeterminacy has also been linked to subjectivity. However, figuring out how quantum indeterminacy relates to svatantriya is beyond my pay grade. I can't be there. Anyway, Peirce understands both the divinity and the realm of lower worldly processes in terms of semiotics. That means systems of signs or theories of systems of signs. Semiotics and semiotic grammar explain fundamental issues of logic, epistemology, and metaphysics. For I think both from Bhakti-Hari, the Shaivas, and from Peirce, in my opinion, in my interpretation. I also believe that in Kriya Karka and Purusha, grammatical Purusha theory, I also believe that an agentially and practically oriented semiotics enables one to understand potency that becomes worthy chance. Sometimes it's, well, okay. Peirce, very interestingly, wait a second. I'm on the wrong page. I don't know, something went wrong with my same page. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I don't know what happened. Oh. Okay. There's something that was wrong with the pages. I don't understand. For several years, I have been working on engagements of the Pratyabhijñā. I know what happened. I think I jumped into semiotic grammar early before I said some other things because somehow the pages came first. And I don't know, maybe my printer put one page under another and I didn't check it. So I'll come back to it. Put all this semiotic grammar on hold for a minute. I don't know what else to do. We'll talk about a couple other things about semiotics first. For several years, I've been working on, okay, I've already talked about why Vimarsha and the Shaivas can be considered as having a kind of semiotics. Because Sukshma Shabdana is not really gross conventional Shabdana, it's Sanketa. It's something different. You have it in babies and birds and so on. So I think that, I mean, there's a book also about plants and animals thinking called How Forests Think. They think with indexical and iconic signs. Anyway, for several, let me see. So there is this semiotics. For several years, I've been working on engagements of the Pratyabhijñā with developments of Peircean semiotics in fields called pan-semiotics, all is semiotic, and biosemiotics. Life is semiotics. These fields build on systems theories about how various factors combine to form entities. The organization of the parts of systems and their adaptations to change are in pan-semiotics and biosemiotics viewed in terms of information and sign usage, which has a grammar, which we'll get back to. According to pan-semiotics and biosemiotics, from an initial indeterminate potency, there is, like Shakti, there is the formation of systems through unifying regularities, like in what I think, like in what Plotinus called henology, and what Peirce calls syntaxism or habits or thirdness, which we'll get to, and in the Pratyabhijñā. These systemic habits initially comprise scientific laws, their regularities, which Peirce described as ideas or resolutions in the mind of some vast consciousness, who is a deity relative to us. Soren Breer finds support. There are some mentions of scientific issues. I'm not a scientist, but I'll just mention Soren Breer finds support for this notion in the contention of Ilya Prigogine and Isabel Stengers in Order Out of Chaos, that in the Big Bang of contemporary cosmology, literally nothing became everything. So biosemiotics looks at life in the context of systems theory or self-organizing or autopoietic systems, if you heard that term. If you haven't, I'm not going to mention it again. Self-organizing systems. In biosemiotics, habits also become, wait a second, self-organizing systems are counter on themselves as systems on any form of life, like a plant or an animal or another species, are counter-entropic in a certain sense, maintaining themselves against entropy. But as Terence Deacon shows, they ultimately use more or less resources. Whether we have more sustainable or less sustainable use of resources, we are still going to use resources. Every living thing does. We're here to form to ways of efficiently using resources. At least that's a scientific reason, whether there's some other philosophical or theological reason. And so we are ultimately, we can't avoid increasing global entropy. So in life, in a certain respect, in terms of thermodynamics, it's sort of like whirlpools in a sink. They are a kind of order versus disorder, or chaos, or potential versus actualized energy. But the whirlpools form an order as whirlpools because they help the water to drain more quickly down the sink. They're actually increasing entropy by fighting against it temporarily until it's a more effective method of increasing entropy. And that's how Terence Deacon at Berkeley, a biosemiotic theorist, interprets life. And the life is using science to interpret its functioning as systems. In the thermodynamic context, again, Prigogine and Stengers describe life as dissipative structures, developing by order through fluctuation. I think pansemiotics and biosemiotics can provide an evolutionary basis for the Pratyabhijñā notion of Shakti Avishkarana and for Sri Aurobindo's emerging supermind, which was deeply influenced by Tantra. In fact, biosemioticist Jesper Hoffmeyer has contended, he's a biochemist and biosemiotic theorist, Hoffmeyer has contended that evolution exhibits a naturally observable teleology toward the emergence of agency. Terence Deacon also describes purpose in autopoietic systems. Oh, there he is. Including the second one, that word. He describes purpose in the self-organizing systems. It's what he calls teleodynamics. Now, since for the Shaivas, Bhartrihari, and Peirce, now I'm back to the, I don't know why the grammar page came early. Now it's one of the grammar pages. Now, since for the Shaivas, Bhartrihari, and Peirce, semiosis or sign usage is isomorphic with reality. Non-living and living unifying systems inevitably have a certain grammar, or we can say semantical syntax. Everything has a grammar. A system to be a system, especially a self-organizing system, has a grammar. In Sanskrit terms, we can understand any system as having its own car tree, or what's functioning is what we can call a car tree, self-organizing, keeping it organized, kriya, the operations of the system, and constituent karakas with their vyaparas. Karakas such as the karna, sampradana, abhidana, and so on. So, in my view, diverting from Peirce, just to make the analogy, I think cosmological and biological systems function, and with grammar, they're sort of like sentences. If you see a tree growing in the yard, that's a sentence in some way. If you see a mouse running after food or running away from a predator, that's a sort of sentence. Peirce's category system functions more abstractly than Sanskrit grammar, as a kind of deliberate semiotic grammar which underlies all of philosophy. His main system is based on organization into sets of three, which has been called Triadism. Richard Koenig has written a book describing it as triadomania, a mania about triads. Peirce even contends that his triads are reflected in the Christian Trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, Holy Spirit or Ghost. Then there are trichotriads. For some years, I have been curious about the history of triads in philosophy and religion, and whether there are any common, I'm not saying all triads are prefigurations of the Trinity, like some Christians have done. I'm wondering whether there are any common, not Christian, rationales in their use of white triad. Besides the Trika and Peircean triads, there are Neoplatonic triads, Hegel's dialectic of thesis, thesis, antithesis, 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 and synthesis. There are triads among mystics, like Surawardhi in the Middle East. In the 20th century, mystic and occultist George Gurdjieff has a law of three. There are many, many sets of triads. Jesse Berger, in his PhD thesis, has also elaborated on correspondences of Peirce's triads with those of the Trika. While Peirce's triads are not the same as Trika triads, they sometimes overlap. What about Sanskrit grammar? Sanskrit grammar is not consciously and deliberately organized into triads, but there are relationships and sets of three within the Sanskrit category, so we can identify, and it makes some sense, in my opinion, to see a Peircean triad, like in the Karaka theory and so on, and in Purusha theory. Peirce's final description, he changed during his life, of a fundamental triad underlying the others is as what he calls firstness, secondness, and thirdness. These categories, this is important, do not identify fixed entities, but semantic and logical relations between entities. From one or the other perspective, the same thing can be understood within each of the three categories. They're always shifting. Basically, in very simple terms, firstness refers to an entity in itself. Secondness refers to the interruption of that by opposition or otherness. Thirdness designates a sort of synthesis you can think of Hegel, and somehow brings us back to the original source. Tohu mohu from Peirce and Pantheism are firstness. The opposition of secondness represents other people and other things. Thirdness characterizes habits, relations, and cynicism in Peirce, what Plotinus, in my opinion, called henology, and what the Shaivas labeled Pratyabhijñā, and so on. I have thought about how firstness, secondness, and thirdness are related to the most prominent Triadic triads, such as Shiva, Shakti, and Nara, Para, Parapara, and Apara, Amena, Mena, Mena, and Mena. As I already said, they're not the same, but I think there is some commonality. So in one interpretation, firstness is Shiva in his non-duality. Secondness is the otherness of Nara, Apara, or Bena. These two are Kandana. These two are mediated by the thirdness of Pratyabhijñā, Sambandha, and so on. In the intermediate realm of Shakti, Parapara, and Bena Bena. Turning back to a more strict semiotic grammar from the Triadic triads, firstness, secondness, and thirdness underlie Peirce's earlier triplet of sign, object, and interpretant. These terms describe the most basic practical syntaxization or structuration of semantics. There's separate signal and sign, referent, and cognitive and practical interpretation. In Sanskrit, sign and object, of course, are shabda and artha. Edwin Jerome, in his 1984, let me see what time it is. I only have a little bit left. Edwin Jerome, in his 1984 article, Language and Symbol in Indian Semiotics, interprets thirdness in terms of semantic shakti, like in Vimarsha, and also dvani. We can again include in the thirdness of the interpreted our own Shaiva terms and Bhartrihari's terms and so on. And also we have the supporting arguments for Pratyabhijñā as a transcendental category by a transcendental process by Jesse Berger and Sean McCracken. Under the heading of sign, object, and interpreter, we can also include my article on Apollo, which I sent to you for optional reading. I have to briefly introduce that, which is pretty hard to do in a minute of time. The Buddhists, Vinaya, Dharmakirti, and followers had nominalistically conceived meaning and reference as nothing but the negation of the inapplicable. The word cow designates the object as a not non-cow. Hindu and other naive realists have argued that negation depends on some positive understanding of reference. However, the Pratyabhijñā thinkers are more ambitious. They contend that negation itself depends on the agentive impetus, and even difference is synthesized from the impetus of an agent. It depends on the impetus and synthesizing difference is a kind of unity. Here's a difference, there's a difference. The unification of the universal interpreted subject Shiva. In the paper on Apoha, I argue about the implications of this argument for competing Western theories. I'm speeding up a little bit, but anyway, even though this is very difficult. Important to Western communication studies is the theory of information of Claude Shannon and Warren Weaver. This contends that information, we can say signs for objects, is differentiation from noise. Like you have the noise on a telegraph line, that's where this theory developed. Patterns within the noise identify meaning in objects. So a sign is differentiation from noise, unlike random objects, like random artifacts in a telegraph. Not accidentally, this is connecting back to earlier discussions, Shannon identifies noise with the thermodynamic term, he gives this deliberately, entropy. As cyberneticist Gregory Bateson puts it, a bit of information is a difference that makes a difference. Also, besides the pragmatic semiotics of Peirce, there's another kind of semiotics, that of Ferdinand de Saussure. Saussure's semiotics is also the basis of the cultural structuralism of Claude Lévi-Strauss and the learning theory of Jean Piaget. Whereas Peirce is concerned with practical speech or parole, Saussure focuses on what constitutes a system of signs or language. The signs in a langue or language are entirely arbitrary, but are defined only by their differences from each other. This point is emphasized as the be-all and end-all by Jacques Derrida in his theory of difference, where he also includes a little bit of Peirce, but the main thing is from Saussure. I can't get into that. In my view, the Pratyabhijñā argument against the Buddhist notion of apoha shows that agency-based pragmatics and synthesis underlies an initial generation of difference, like Shannon and Weaver described, as well as the organization of differences into a larger set of structures, like Saussure described. Incidentally, biosemiotics, and also Terence Deacon described difference in biosemiotics, but I can't get into that. There's some thermodynamics there too. Incidentally, another biosemioticist, Hoffmeyer, has identified living systems evolution of arbitrary mnemonic systems as systems based on differences. This is seen in the arbitrary morphological codes of DNA. Those codes are evolved biological systems to identify morphological features of organisms that have a kind of conventional relation to the morphological features of organisms. There are just certain chemicals that represent the creation of certain structures. This underlies that, according to Hoffmeyer, as well as the Saussurean structures of language and culture. Because such structural systems are based on differences, Hoffmeyer has called these devices digital system. A bit, like in the quote from mentioned earlier, a bit of information is a binary digit. I suggest that the generation of difference, according to the Shaivas and Peirce, underlies not only the Buddhist apoha, I'm repeating that, but also the differences of Shannon Weaver information and digital systems such as DNA and the organization into Saussurean structures. Turning to other triads very quickly on one more page. Pratyabhijñā and Abhinavagupta emphasize in their Kriya Karta theory and Kartri and emphasize a Kartri-centered syntax, which I've called a mythical ritual syntax of omnipotence. All the Karkas beside the Karti are reduced to or absorbed within the sambandhas or vyaparas of Kriya. And Kriya is reduced to or absorbed in the Kartri. Pertinent here are the triad of Kartri, Kriya, and Karma. In the Karkas behind the Kartri are all of them have a role, except all of them have a role, but important is also especially Karna. And this Kriya, Karna, Karma triad is also immersed in the triplicity of Pramatri, it's not the triplicity, Pramatri, Pramana, and Prama with regard to Prameyas, and then you have the triplicity. We can say, I hope you can follow me, we can say that the secondness of the Karma and the thirdness of the Kriya and the other Karkas are all absorbed into the firstness of the Kartri Karka. In my another paper I didn't give you on grammatical persons, this is the last page, I examined the Pratyabhijñā theory of grammatical Purushas, persons, what we call in English first, second, and third persons. In Sanskrit, they're designated differently. Here the I is not conceived as an agent who generates the thirdness of the interpreted as discussed. In this context, the first person is conceived by Peirce as firstness, an entity that is related to other entities. So in a conversation, I relate to you by talking about this or that in the third person, or he or she in the third person. I relate to another person talking about the third person. The Shaivas developed a rudimentary sort of philosophical and poetic reception theory. You have this in the Poetics and in the Pratyabhijñā, in which the third and second persons are absorbed in the I. I relate these, there's also an area called semiotic anthropology, Peircean semiotic anthropology. I relate these discussions to that and theories of Milton Singer, Benjamin Lee, and E. Valentine Daniels. In Daniels' I don't know how to pronounce this word, in Daniels' anthropological account of the pilgrimage to Sabarimala or Malai in Kerala, I don't know how to pronounce it. He describes the celebrant's immersion in the Peircean category of firstness, in which the self and other are absorbed in the immediate and inchoate feelings of the Atman. In conclusion, I hope you can follow something. I am not claiming that Neoplatonism or Peircean thought are the same as non-Jewish Shaivism. The points of agreement help us to respond critically to the Pratyabhijñā. That is, in some key respects, to accept ideas of the Pratyabhijñā is to accept aspects of Neoplatonism or Peirce. Points of disagreement of Shaivism with Neoplatonism, Peirce, or other Western philosophies should also be evaluated. With regard to the overarching interpretation of Shaivism as of Pratyabhijñā influenced Shaivism as a sort of pragmatism, let me add that I used to not to like pragmatism, actually, philosophically. It seemed to me to be waffling between a sort of skepticism or relativism on the one hand and objectivism. When it refutes one, it sounds like the other. That's what I used to say. It refutes objectivism, it sounds like relativism. It refutes relativism, it sounds like objectivism. However, reflection on the Pratyabhijñā and Peirce has changed my mind. I now don't think it's that clear. I understand both the Pratyabhijñā and Peircean thought in our contemporary pluralistic situation as modestly admitting a sort of fallibilism and the need to test ideas in intellectual and worldly practice. That's the end. Well, thanks a lot. Thank you. I can't hear anybody. Yeah. Oh, anyway.
Thank you so much, Professor Lawrence, for this absolutely fascinating talk. I'm totally stunned by the array of philosophers that you've presented to us. I'd like to invite everybody to ask questions. And then there is one question by Professor Timosina, so maybe I will let him go first. Professor Timosina, would you like to ask the question yourself? You want me to ask? Oh, okay, so I'll read it out.
Are you on silent?
He's on silent right now. Okay, so anyway, he would like to ask, besides his essay on agency, what other works can he recommend for a course on agency and freedom?
Oh, wow. That's a subject that's discussed all over philosophy and culture studies. And I don't know if I can give you a bibliography by listing names. I would recommend biosemiotic theory because you can link it. I mean, I think someone named Jesper Hoffmeyer from Denmark is the one who I quoted earlier on the evolution toward increasing agency among plants and animals. And his most introductory book, it has a great title. It's called Signs of Meaning in the Universe. He has another book called Biosemiotics. That's how I discovered biosemiotics. I saw that book in an APA convention, meeting in the book display, and it looked very interesting. I had been reading books on the origin of language, and that seemed so interesting because it was trying to interpret life as a kind of language and living as a kind of language. And so that's what got me into that. But he's the one who says it's a teleology towards increasing agency. Shaiva theories.
Sorry, Professor Timosina was back this up. He says specifically from the Trika perspective. So he is looking for the Trika perspective on agency.
Well, that's Shankara Chaitanya Bharati calls it Svatantriyavada. You know, I first got interested in some of the grammatical backgrounds to agency and Shaivism in the 80s. And my parents were visiting me in India, and we were traveling to Pondicherry, and we met some Pandit who worked with one of the Pandit who specialized in Vyakarna, and worked with one of the French research organizations. And he explained to me some of the basic points that the Shaivas were emphasizing. And then later I read with Salmini Deshmukh in Maryland. She earned her PhD with Ingles in Harvard, but she wasn't working as an academic at that time. But we read Patanjali in the Karika Annika. That was a long time ago. It was in the 80s when I last read that. Some of the ideas are there. The idea of Svatantria, but you see, there's a kind of independence of the Khartri, but it's not emphasized in the way that the Shaivas do later. The way I understand what the Shaivas are doing is taking the idea from Patanjali and exaggerating it greatly, or radicalizing it, making it like a be-all and end-all, kind of thing. You have Panini, of course, about the Karta also, Svatantra Karta. What is that, 49 or 149? I forget. Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you, David, for the whole talk, but what melted me down is you mentioned my guru's name, Shankara Chaitanya Bharati, and I'm telling you all, some of you, my students, how often in the Western philosophical conversation you find cited the name of these scholars from India who are hardly known. If they write in English, of course, they make some name. Guruji's book is in Sanskrit. I hope we all could come together to translate it one day. Thank you, David. Yeah.
That would be wonderful. He's very knowledgeable. And there isn't enough discussion between some of the pundits in India and Western academics. They seem to operate independently. I mean, some people cross over. I mean, you have crossed over, but there are a lot of people who don't, who aren't, who don't, they only speak in Sanskrit, don't even know English. So, does anybody have any other questions?
I'd like to welcome more questions. Please feel free to raise your hand, you guys, or put them in the chat. And I think I have a question, and I think Anna also has a question. I'll let Anna go first. So go ahead, Anna.
Thank you, Dr. Lawrence. I have a question about this way of interpreting creation ex nihilo with Peirce theory, because one question that constantly arises in our conversations within this community is the question about why does Shiva decide to become other, right? Why does Shiva decide to create all of this world where suffering and things that are not blissful exist, right? Why, if Shiva is blissful, why does it limit itself? Why does it decide to limit itself? And you clearly, this theory clearly describes how from the one we have the many, right? But can this theory of science and semiotics give us an explanation of why, right? Or of the why is there many rather than nothing?
I don't think, not that I know of. I don't really have any view I want to argue for about that. I don't know. I mean, I think even the idea like Lila is sort of just like saying we don't know why God is doing what he or she is doing, and somehow it's good. It's, he enjoys it, he likes it, or she likes it. Even the way Plotinus describes it is because of the overflowing of perfection, why does perfection overflow into a state with greater incompleteness and potentiality? I don't think Plotinus emphasizes it. It explains it very clearly. You know, and he likes doing it. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. I think, you know, like in the book of Job, they say the ways of God are inscrutable. We can't know why God does what he or she does. I don't know. Do you know, Stanishwar? Oh, you're on silent.
I will tell you when I become God.
And let us know. Yeah, I mean,
why God does what he does, I need to be God. Sometimes I even don't know why I do some things that I do. So
No, but if may I mean, I understand that. I'm just wondering, because in Plotinus, there is a theory in the sense that there is an excess, right? I mean, there is this excess of energy that pours into, you know, and needs to create, right? Is there an excess of bliss, or is there in this system of cosmic evolution, is there a need to express itself and communicate with itself? I mean, can we explain it in those terms? If this is a theory of communication, of semiotics, could we explain it in terms of an inner, the need of dialoguing with itself? I don't know. I mean, I understand that ultimately everything is inscrutable, but I wonder what is, yeah, if there is a way of understanding this need for creation in terms of semiotics.
well, I don't have it in terms of semiotics, but I think the idea of Leela, Stanishwar is going to, well, Professor Timosino was going to say something, but I think the idea of Leela, I don't think, I'm not ready to prove it, and I can't prove it semiotically, but I don't think that's entirely different talking about this overflowing or excess of perfection in Plotinus. I mean, it sort of likes it. I don't know. Maybe he's playing, having fun. It's like a baby. What were you going to say, Professor Timosina?
I think that we should explore the answer within the core of what constitutes Shiva as Shiva is his freedom. And we, from the stage of bondage, imagine freedom to give us unsurpassable power. But when you are singular, when you are complete, when you are omnipotent and every single attributes we have given to God, how do you express your freedom? Because you already are everything. And how do you express your freedom? I think that this bondage is Shiva's means to express his freedom. And how would he, if Shiva, how would he express his love to Sati if he's in this singularity? Because that love in singularity is very different from love in difference. How would he experience embodied love if he never had have our level of differentiation? So I would go to the core issues of freedom and love. Thank you.
But you know, in Gnosticism and in some Christianity, including Bernard of Clairvaux and William of St. Carey, God created the world to love his own reflection. He's like loving himself by looking in the mirror. He's, you know, and maybe he's just, you know, so I think that overlaps a little bit with an idea of Leela, doesn't it?
So Nita Sahai has a question. I'd like to ask Nita to unmute.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that wonderful presentation, Dr. Lawrence.
Thank you.
I'm just recently starting to read about Shaivism and Vedanta, and I have a very basic question in general about that. We always start with the inward journey of trying to define what is consciousness, and we say neti neti, and finally you come to when you meditate, you come to that kind of a blankness, and even that's not the pure consciousness. And then the guru will tell you that when you wake up from deep sleep, the consciousness that knew that you were sleeping, that's the turiya, right? That's to use Vedantic language, that's the pure consciousness. That's the Shiva consciousness, I suppose. So, however, when a person is in coma or when they have what do you call anesthesia, when they wake up, unless somebody tells them you were in anesthesia or you were in coma, do you remember anything? Suppose nobody was to tell them that, and they wake up and just walk into the world. Would that person be aware that they had a really long sleep? And I mean, so do we have any sort of sense of that pure consciousness state in that situation? I know this is a super fundamental question and not directly related to what Dr. Lawrence was talking about, but I'd appreciate an answer, please.
I think that Shaiva seemed to say things that would suggest it, but I wonder about it. And I don't know, I'm a pluralist. So I mean, Professor Timosina has a background also besides in Tantra in Vedanta. I mean, a lot of people who are interested in non-dual Kashmir Shaivism want to argue that it's completely unique. I don't view all these traditions as completely unique. I think there are some common truths and there are differences, and we can dialogue and debate with each other. What was I going to say? So I'm reminded of a medieval Christian. I'm not a Christian, by the way. I used to try to study it in religion programs. But the medieval mystical text, the cloud of unknowing. Do you know when they describe going to a mystical state as entering a cloud of unknowing and getting at this apophasis that you're referring to? Do you know when you're in the cloud of unknowing? I don't think you can know when you're in the cloud of unknowing. It's not knowing. What happens? I mean, Vimarsha is not Vikalpa. Some people interpret it that way. I think it's supposed to do some of the same things as Vikalpa, but it ultimately is nirvikalpa. So, do you have a Vikalpa about having been in a nirvikalpa state of Vimarsha? I don't know. I mean, if you have like the Kena Upanishad, it's not known by those who say they know it. And, but you have to, in some way, awaken to it or become enlightened to it. I don't know. I really don't know. I'll know after I become enlightened in a few million years.
Okay, thank you.
But I don't know.
Acharyaji, do you have anything to add to that?
You're silent again.
No, I'm good. We are working on similar ideas. I only wish we had more scholarship in this field because these classical authors have so much to share with us. But like you all know how rare the scholarship is of David Aitken Mrinal. I think he left, but we have just so few people doing real scholarship. I know that some of you, right, Lisa and Anna and Daya Shiva, and I know I have big hopes from you guys. But we really, I cannot say there's like a lot more answers to these. And what this means, Anna, is that job comes down to us.
You know, I mean, this may be relevant and it's combined with some, I mean, I think that's good because I don't think we can know until we really, have realized this. But I'm reminded of something that's a little different, but it's related. I remember once I was at a conference in Triadic, and the Hindu scholars and there were Buddhist scholars there from Sri Lanka, from the Mahabodhi Society, and they were reviving all these debates that are thousands of years old, the Hindus and Buddhists. And I was just hearing all these debates, and later while we were waiting for something, I forget what, I walked up to one of these senior monks from the Mahabodhi Society, and I said, well, I don't know why we're arguing about these things, because we're all talking about some kind of nirvikalpika state. And the monk looked at me and he said, in a nirvikalpika state, there's no Buddhism there. And I'm not sure there will be any Shaivism either. I mean, Shiva's ultimate nature is not something we can understand intellectually. And I'm not sure we're going to be saying, I found the truth according to Kashmir Shaivism. When we find the truth. I mean, I'm not sure what we'll call it. You have to wake up to it to describe it, like the Kena Upanishad says.
Wow, we have a couple of more questions waiting. One is from H. I don't know who H is, but H, could you unmute yourself? H. There's also.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I audible? Okay. Thank you for the talk, sir. I'm a student working in the Kashmir Shaivism care. I've been reading about your interpretation of the absolute or the Shiva in your 1919 book, which is the Pratyabhijñā Rediscovering God, where you have identified the absolute as the Christian God, not exactly, but in which logos becomes the participatory matrix in which we participate in the interpretive language or the rational language in that sense. And further, you have clarification in your 2008 book and the 2022 chapter in the logical handbook. So I'm just curious about your revised understanding of the absolute of Shiva, as in the Shiva. How do you understand it? Because there are certain problems if we take it as the idea of God also, because not just it's not language only, but time also becomes an important category there. And absolute stands beyond time in terms of the timelessness. So I'm just curious about your present understanding of the absolute, the Shiva, in that sense.
Well, what is my present understanding of the absolute?
Yeah, as from Abhinavagupta's tradition.
Well, I mean, I do talk about things philosophically, but I don't think I really ultimately understand completely what the absolute is. I don't know if that makes any sense. I mean, I don't think it can be captured in my language. I mean, I say certain things. I mean, it can be relevant in ordinary life to say absolute versus non-absolute, or the absolute is this way rather than that way. But I've expressed my views in my publications and in my talks about this versus that, but I don't I'm not sure I can say anything more about or what it really is. You know what I mean? Beyond my intellectual understanding. You know, the first book is called Rediscovering God with Transcendental Argument. Someday I want to write an article or a book or something called Transcendental Argument as a Mind Trap. Because you can't get out of it. If you say, I remember somebody asked Ramana Maharshi a question like, how can you go beyond thinking to find the self? You know, because even going beyond thinking is a thought. And he said the mind plays tricks like that to keep you caught all the time. You can't get out of it. And so I think that we're always trying to have an intellectual understanding of something beyond intellectual understanding. And that itself is an intellectual understanding. So I mean, I wish that I could have a better, if I can directly, but I can't tell you anything more. I mean, I've said certain things. I think they're relevant in worldly academic life and philosophical or theological discussions, but I don't know if they're relevant to a sage. You know, I mean, I don't think anybody. I don't know.
Thank you, because thank you. I mean, that was troubling because we find contrary statements every now and then, and especially this idea of prasiddhi was prasiddhi, where Abhinavagupta makes this agama and compares it with the absolute here. So in that connection, I was asking that how can we have a even rational understanding of this idea, absolute emanating all these traditions with what he calls shastras or prasiddhi. I think.
Yeah, well, he's speaking in a more worldly level. You know, like in the verse Kartari Gatari in the Pratyabhijñā Nondual, they're asking how you can prove or disprove or rationally, or ritually establish that you are Shiva when you are already Shiva. And it's like proving I'm a person. Can I prove to you that I'm a person? I don't know. And then you have discussions of Anupaya in the Tantra Loka and Tantra Sara. I don't think Abhinavagupta believes the final answer is something that we can arrive at intellectually. You know, I mean, there's Sattvarka and then there's the higher Upaya, Anupaya.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'd like to follow up on that a little bit and then actually ask Ajit who also has a question. But just to kind of follow up just briefly is one point I've always noticed about the pragmatic, let's call him the pragmaticist philosopher Peirce. It seems like Charles Sanders Peirce was one of the most enigmatic philosophers and most difficult to wrap our heads around. And we were always taking him in little bits. And one of the little bits that I recall like most vividly is his saying that we keep making this kind of categorical mistake that consciousness is in us. We're in consciousness. And then to understand consciousness as having this triadic structure kind of puts us in a position where we're trying to intuit this triadic structure of consciousness and get out of the view that it's in us, but rather we're in it. And we can't get outside of consciousness to like objectively look at consciousness. Do you feel like this is one of the things that that we can assist Peirce with? We can help make Peirce's philosophy more intelligible by looking at the relational structure of consciousness.
I'm not entirely sure what you mean by we can't get out of it, but we can talk about triads.
The triadic structure of consciousness itself is something we can refer to, but we can't get outside of consciousness because he sees us as being in consciousness, not consciousness as being in us.
Well, that's the other point that Derrida takes from Peirce in his difference in deferral. we can only refer to texts with other texts or words with other words. We can't ever, I can't explain what is a telephone, in its own nature. I can only say this is, I can point to it with signs, or it's this object that you communicate, something that you use to talk electronically with others or something. I can't ever get out of it. But I think talking in terms of relations, that's what Derrida called deferral from Peirce. But talking in terms of relations does make a lot of sense, and I think that is the attraction of McCracken and Berger to the Shaiva theory of relation, and that is what is happening in a lot of the scientific and technological and pansemiotic and biosemiotic interpretations of Peirce on relations. And I mean, like the biosemiotic theory, it is some philosophical ideas, but they're trying to ground it in lots of science, like Terence Deacon and Jesper Hoffmeyer. They're full of evolutionary theory and biochemistry. And so they're trying to really look at what's happening in an organism and what's the function of this and that part of the organism. And I think that they're making it more concrete. It's talking about what Berger and McCracken were getting at, this relationality. I don't know, that's just, I mean, that's maybe, I don't know if I can add anything, because you already may understand some of that, how to presuppose some of that. Right.
Thank you.
And the triadomania is very complicated. I don't understand all the triads. No.
Ajit, would you like to ask your question, Ajit?
Yes. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Professor, for your wonderful presentation. Actually, my question is, there are so many different doctrines of karma, that is the doctrines of actions given by the Indian philosophical schools like atheists and theist schools. But actually, in Shaivism, they attribute the action as a power of our consciousness. Then what is the actual nature of doctrine of karma from the Kashmir Shaiva's point of view? Thank you.
I haven't focused on that into learning about some new theories. Like I don't even know if it's Kashmir Shaivism, but in the Kashmir series of texts and studies, there's a book I was always curious to look into, Janma Marna Vichara. But I think that some of what they're describing is coming from grammar. One of my Sanskrit teachers was Edwin Giroux, and actually with him, I read some of the Pratyabhijñā discussions of Pala and Vyapara, which you have discussed in a epistemological context, but it has backgrounds in Pala and Vyapara in grammar. And he gave me this article of his that was also, it was rejected by Wendy Nottingham from, well, I mean, she's also a teacher, but and I agree with some of a lot of what she said. But what was I going to say? Giroux interprets karma grammatically, and he's trying to show that the karma is part of the kriya, and that's what you have. Some of that is reflected in the word karma, which can mean the object that receives the result, the pala, and it can also mean the kriya. Karma can mean kriya also. And Giroux, you can look at his article called Kim Karma Iti, or What is Karma? Kim Karma Iti. And there he makes this argument that there's a particular understanding, and I'm not entirely sure about his full argument, but he argues that there's an understanding of action as inevitably bound to results. And this is articulated in Nigesha and Sanskrit grammar and others, and it's seen in the use of passive intransitive syntax as paradigmatic. Like it, what is passive? I don't know how you can't express it in English. You can say it is raining, but that's active, but something like that where the action and the result are bound together. And he thinks that in Sanskrit grammar, and I can't show whether he's right, that Pala is part of Vyapara, and that is the fundamental reality. And what the Shaivas are doing are taking some aspect of Panini and Patanjali about Nikarta and some Nyaya about Nikarta and radicalizing it and absorbing everything into the action and the action into Nikarta, into the agent. So as how I understand the karma is within the Kriya of the Karta, within the agent. But I don't know what exactly is discussed in Janma, Marna, Vichara. It may not be about that at all. I never got to read it. So maybe that's about something else, about predicting your future life or something.
Yeah, thank you.
That
I
was
don't know
one-
anything more. I haven't really examined those. Sorry, Lisa?
Yes, thank you, Professor.
I'd like to thank Professor Lawrence so much for coming and giving us this fantastic talk and answering our questions. I can't tell you how delighted we are to have you, and this was really wonderful. I'd just like to ask Professor Timosina to kind of close us out and be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
अस्मद्रूप समाविष्टः अस्मद्रूप समाविष्टः स्वात्मनात्मनिवारणे शिवः करोतु निजया नमः शक्त्या ततात्मने अस्मद्रूप समाविष्टः स्वात्मनात्मनिवारणे शिवः करोतु निजया नमः शक्त्या ततात्मने। ॐ